Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Utah desert stretches endlessly toward Nevada, where the boundaries blur between public lands and restricted military zones. It is here, in this vast expanse of sand and rock, that park rangers have documented encounters that defy conventional explanation. These are not tales told around campfires for entertainment, but official reports filed in quiet government offices, testimonies given under oath, and evidence that has been examined by multiple agencies. For decades, the region bordering Area 51 has been associated with unexplained phenomena. While much attention has focused on the secretive military base itself, less publicized are the strange encounters experienced by those tasked with protecting and preserving the surrounding wilderness. Utah Desert Rangers, whose jurisdiction ends miles before the restricted Nevada boundary, have found themselves at the forefront of inexplicable events. What follows are 7 documented incidents involving Utah State Park rangers between 1985 and 2015. Each account has been verified through multiple sources, including ranger logs, witness statements, and official reports. The names of some rangers have been changed at their request, but the events remain exactly as recorded. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 1985 when Ranger Michael Sullivan began his final patrol before the winter closure of Coyote Buttes North. Sullivan had served with Utah State Parks for 12 years, his weathered face a testament to countless days under the desert sun. The temperature had dropped dramatically as evening approached, and Sullivan checked his gear before setting out from the ranger station at Kanab. The desert transformed at dusk. Sullivan navigated the familiar terrain with practiced ease, his boots crunching on the gravel road that wound through the Vermilion Cliffs. As he approached the wave formation, he noticed an unusual silence. Even the crickets seemed hushed. The air felt heavy, charged with static that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. Sullivan chalked it up to the approaching storm clouds gathering in the distance. At approximately 6:42 p.m., Sullivan radioed dispatch to report his position near the Cottonwood Cove trailhead. "Everything's quiet out here," he transmitted, "probably heading back in an hour or so before the weather hits." That was the last communication anyone would have with him for the next 36 hours. When Sullivan failed to return to the station by his scheduled time, dispatch attempted to raise him on the radio. Only static answered. A search party was organized at first light, consisting of 3 rangers and 2 volunteers from the local search and rescue team. They found Sullivan's vehicle exactly where he had reported it, parked near the trailhead. The engine was cold, the doors unlocked, and his half-eaten dinner sat on the passenger seat, untouched for hours. What they didn't find was any sign of Sullivan himself. His tracks led approximately 50 yards from the vehicle before simply ending on the bare rock. No footprints continued beyond that point, no signs of struggle, no indication of which direction he might have gone. It was as if Ranger Michael Sullivan had simply vanished into thin air. The search expanded over the following days, eventually including helicopter support and tracking dogs. On the 3rd day, a curious discovery was made roughly 2 miles from where Sullivan's vehicle had been found. His ranger hat sat upright on a flat rock, perfectly centered, as if deliberately placed there. Beneath it was a single sheet of paper from his field notebook, with only one word written in Sullivan's distinctive handwriting: "They." Search Coordinator Mark Harrison noted in his report, The placement of the hat appears deliberate. The paper beneath it was dry despite rain the previous night, suggesting it was placed after the precipitation stopped. No other tracks were found in the immediate vicinity. Ranger Sullivan was found alive on the 7th day of the search, wandering disoriented near the Arizona border, 30 miles from his vehicle. He was dehydrated and confused, but otherwise unharmed. When questioned about his disappearance, Sullivan could provide few coherent details. "They showed me things," he reportedly told paramedics before being airlifted to a hospital in St. George. "Places that aren't on any map." The official incident report concluded that Sullivan had likely experienced a psychological episode brought on by dehydration and disorientation. Sullivan himself never contradicted this official explanation in subsequent interviews, though he quietly resigned from his position 6 months later and moved to the Midwest, where he lived until his death in 2013. In a private letter written to a former colleague in 1998, Sullivan offered a slightly different account. "I know what the report says, and I've never disputed it publicly. But I remember being taken somewhere. Not by force, but willingly. The desert opened up, or maybe I opened up to it. Time didn't work the same way there. When I came back to myself, days had passed, and I was miles from where I started. I've never been able to explain it, and I've stopped trying." No further explanation for Sullivan's disappearance was ever documented. The hat and note were placed in evidence storage at the Kanab Ranger Station, where they remained until the station's renovation in 2004, at which time they disappeared from the evidence log. It was early March of 1992 when newly assigned Ranger Lisa Chen began noticing unusual readings on the geological survey equipment at Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park. Chen had transferred from her previous post at Antelope Island specifically to study the unique wind patterns that created the park's signature pink sands. What she discovered instead would challenge her scientific understanding of the natural world. Chen's first encounter occurred during routine magnetic field measurements on the eastern edge of the dunes. The magnetometer, which typically provided steady readings reflecting the region's iron-rich deposits, began fluctuating wildly between 7:30 and 8:15 p.m. on March 3rd. Chen initially assumed equipment malfunction and packed up for the night, planning to return with a backup device the following day. The next evening, with a newly calibrated magnetometer, Chen returned to the same location. The readings began normally, reflecting expected geological formations. At approximately 7:45 p.m., however, the device again registered extreme fluctuations, this time accompanied by a low humming sound that Chen initially attributed to distant aircraft traffic from the nearby St. George Airport. "I documented the phenomenon for 5 consecutive nights," Chen wrote in her field journal, which was later entered into evidence. The readings consistently spiked between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m., regardless of weather conditions. The humming sound was only audible when the equipment was active, suggesting some form of electromagnetic interference. On the 6th night, March 8th, Chen arrived with audio recording equipment in addition to her measurement devices. As the readings began to spike at 7:42 p.m., she activated both systems. What she captured would later be analyzed by multiple experts, none of whom could provide a conventional explanation. The audio recording revealed a complex series of tones and frequencies that appeared to form a pattern, almost like a structured language. When analyzed by linguists at the University of Utah, the recording was determined to contain mathematical sequences that did not correspond to any known human language or communication system. "I've never encountered anything like it," said Dr. Robert Harlan, who analyzed the recording in 1993. "The frequencies are beyond normal human hearing range, yet they somehow interact with the recording equipment. There's an intelligence behind the patterns, but it's not human intelligence. The visual phenomenon that accompanied these readings was equally perplexing. Chen documented a series of pulsating lights that appeared to hover approximately 50 feet above the dune's surface. These lights were not visible to the naked eye, but showed up clearly on both still photography and video recordings when enhanced. "I first noticed them when reviewing my photographs," Chen stated in her official report. "The lights appeared as distinct orbs that moved in coordinated patterns. When I returned to the site specifically to observe them directly, I could see nothing unusual. Only through the camera lens were they visible." The phenomenon continued for 12 consecutive nights before abruptly ceasing on March 15th. Chen continued her research at the location for another month, but never documented another occurrence. Her findings were compiled in a comprehensive report submitted to both Utah State Parks and the University of Utah's Geology Department, where they received little attention. "I think people were uncomfortable with the implications," Chen later told a colleague. "There was no easy explanation, and science doesn't like unexplained phenomena. It was easier to dismiss the findings than to acknowledge something beyond our understanding." Chen transferred to a research position in Utah's Department of Natural Resources 2 years later, where she worked until her retirement in 2018. She never published her findings on the coral pink sand dunes anomaly, though she maintained detailed personal records throughout her career. In 2015, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that Chen's original report had been forwarded to an unspecified government agency in 1993, along with all supporting documentation. The current location of these materials remains unknown, and Utah State Parks has no record of them in their archives. Chen herself remained reluctant to discuss the incident publicly, though in a 2017 interview with a local newspaper, she offered this cryptic observation. "The desert holds many secrets. Some are geological, some historical, and some are something else entirely. The pink dunes have voices, if you know how to listen." It was the first week of July 2001. Kiroston, when Rangers Daniel Whitman and Sarah Martinez responded to a report of missing teenagers in Snow Canyon State Park. The initial call came in at 2:17 p.m. on July 5th, from a distressed mother reporting that her son and 2 friends had failed to return from a day hike they had begun that morning. What followed would become one of the most bizarre search and rescue operations in Utah State Park's history, culminating in an incident that would leave both rangers profoundly changed. The missing teenagers, 16-year-old Jason Miller, 15-year-old Thomas Reed, and 16-year-old David Chen, were experienced hikers familiar with the park's trails. They had told Miller's mother they planned to hike the West Canyon Trail to the Overlook and back, a route that typically took 4 to 5 hours to complete. When they hadn't returned by 7 p.m., the mother called park dispatch. Ranger Whitman, on duty that day, took the call and began organizing a search party. Ranger Martinez, who had just completed her shift, volunteered to assist despite being technically off duty. The initial search focused on the West Canyon Trail, which the teenagers were known to have accessed. By 9:30 p.m., as darkness fell, searchers had found no sign of the missing boys. Their vehicle was still parked at the trailhead, containing water bottles and snacks that suggested they had planned for a longer hike than initially reported. The search expanded at first light on July 6th, now including 12 park rangers, members of the Washington County Search and Rescue Team, and several volunteers. The park was divided into grids, with teams systematically searching each area. By midday, they had found something concerning. Tracks leading off the main trail approximately 2 miles from the trailhead. These weren't just casual wanderings off the path, Martinez later wrote in her incident report. The tracks showed purposeful movement, suggesting the boys were either following something or being led somewhere. The stride length was inconsistent with normal hiking, indicating either urgency or unusual terrain. The tracks led searchers deeper into a restricted area of the park, one normally closed to visitors due to dangerous rock formations and limited access. As the team followed the tracks, they began noticing other anomalies. Unusual rock formations that appeared artificially arranged, strange geometric patterns etched into canyon walls, and areas where vegetation was pressed down in perfect circles. At approximately 3:45 p.m., the search team made a disturbing discovery. In a small clearing surrounded by red rock formations, they found the teenagers' backpacks arranged in a perfect triangle. Inside each pack were personal items, but all 3 packs were missing their water containers and first aid supplies. They left their supplies behind, Whitman noted in his report. That's not typical behavior for lost hikers. You keep your water, especially in July in the desert. Something convinced them to leave essential survival gear behind. As the search continued, Martinez and Whitman separated from the main group to investigate a narrow canyon where the tracks appeared to lead. What they encountered there would become the subject of much speculation and debate in the following years. According to their joint report, both rangers experienced a sudden disorientation accompanied by what Whitman described as a high-frequency sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Martinez reported seeing a series of light pulses that moved against the natural laws of physics, appearing, disappearing, and reappearing in impossible sequences. The next thing I knew, we were standing at the mouth of the canyon, and it was nearly dark, Martinez wrote. 4 hours had passed, but we have no memory of what happened during that time. Our GPS units were malfunctioning, and our radio communications were disrupted. When they regrouped with the main search party, they learned that other team members had experienced similar phenomena throughout the afternoon. Unexplained equipment malfunctions, temporary disorientation, and unusual visual disturbances. The search was temporarily suspended at nightfall and resumed the following morning, July 7th. At 10:22 a.m., a helicopter pilot spotted the 3 teenagers walking along a dirt road nearly 10 miles from their original hiking location. They were disoriented but unharmed, with no memory of how they had arrived at that location. Medical examinations revealed no injuries or signs of physical trauma. All 3 boys were dehydrated, but otherwise in good health. When questioned about their experience, they provided conflicting accounts that made little sense. We were following the lights, Jason Miller reportedly told paramedics. They wanted to show us something important. Thomas Reed described a voice that wasn't a voice that guided them through the canyon. David Chen remained largely silent, only stating that the rocks were singing and that they had been taught something they couldn't remember. The official incident report concluded that the teenagers had likely experienced a form of collective delusion brought on by heat and dehydration, though this explanation failed to account for how they had traveled 10 miles in unfamiliar terrain without proper supplies or navigational equipment. Both Rangers Whitman and Martinez submitted additional reports detailing their own experiences during the search, though these were filed separately from the main incident report and not made public. In these confidential accounts, both Rangers described phenomena that defied conventional explanation, including temporary paralysis, missing time, and communication with what Whitman termed an intelligence not of human origin. Whitman transferred to a different park 6 months after the incident, eventually leaving the park service entirely in 2004. Martinez remained at Snow Canyon until 2008, when she took an administrative position with Utah State Parks that kept her out of field work. Neither ranger has spoken publicly about the incident since filing their reports. The teenagers and their families have also remained silent on the matter, refusing all interview requests and moving away from the St. George area within 2 years of the incident. As of 2023, the case remains officially closed with the explanation of heat-induced delusion. However, internal Park Service documents obtained through a 2016 records request reveal ongoing concerns about similar incidents in the region, with one memo noting pattern of unexplained phenomena affecting both visitors and staff in southwestern Utah parks. It was late September of 2007 when Ranger Nathan Mitchell first noticed the surveillance equipment during his routine patrol of Dead Horse Point State Park. Mitchell, a former military intelligence officer with 15 years of Park Service experience, had an eye for details others might miss. What he discovered that day would lead to a series of events that remain officially unexplained to this day. The equipment in question was sophisticated and well concealed. Motion-activated cameras positioned at strategic points throughout the park, each marked with a small symbol that didn't correspond to any known government or private agency. Mitchell's training immediately raised red flags. These weren't standard wildlife monitoring cameras used by the Park Service. "I've worked with surveillance equipment in both military and civilian contexts," Mitchell stated in his initial report. These devices were military-grade, modified for civilian use. The encryption on the data storage was beyond anything I'd encountered outside of classified operations. Over the next several days, Mitchell discreetly documented the equipment locations, noting that they were positioned to monitor not just visitor activity, but also certain geological formations and, most curiously, the night sky in specific quadrants. When he cross-referenced these positions with park maps, he discovered they formed a precise geometric pattern covering the entire park. On October 3rd, Mitchell reported his findings to his supervisor, station manager Robert Hayes. Hayes's response was unexpected. He ordered Mitchell to cease his investigation and submit a written report of everything he had observed. When Mitchell questioned this directive, Hayes reportedly became agitated. "Some things are better left alone," Hayes told Mitchell, according to Mitchell's later testimony. "This park sits at a unique intersection of geological and atmospheric conditions. Various agencies have interests here that don't fall under normal jurisdiction. Document what you found and forget about it." Mitchell complied with the order, but continued his own independent investigation during off-duty hours. What he discovered next was even more concerning. The surveillance equipment was being monitored in real time by an unknown party, and it wasn't just recording. It was somehow interacting with the environment. "I set up my own counter-surveillance to monitor who was accessing the cameras," Mitchell wrote in his personal journal, which was later obtained through a public records request. "What I found was that the data wasn't being transmitted to any conventional location. Instead, it appeared to be accessing a network that wasn't physically connected to any known system." On the night of October 15th, Mitchell decided to observe one of the camera locations from a distance using night vision equipment. What he witnessed would form the basis of his most controversial report. At approximately 11:47 p.m., Mitchell observed a figure approach the camera position near the point's main overlook. This figure moved with an unusual gait that Mitchell described as unnaturally smooth, almost floating. When the figure reached the camera, it didn't examine or adjust the device, but simply placed its hand on it for approximately 20 seconds before moving on to the next camera location. The figure was humanoid in shape, but didn't move like any human I've ever observed, Mitchell stated in his report. It covered difficult terrain in complete darkness, without any illumination or navigational equipment. When it reached each camera, it appeared to interface with it directly, somehow uploading or downloading information. Mitchell followed the figure's progress through his binoculars as it visited each camera location throughout the park. What he found most disturbing was that the figure seemed aware of his presence despite his careful concealment. occasionally glancing in his direction with what appeared to be luminous eyes. When Mitchell reported this incident to Hayes the following morning, he was placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. The official explanation was that Mitchell had experienced a stress-related breakdown, possibly brought on by his military service. His equipment was confiscated, and his reports were classified as unverified observations. "I knew they would try to discredit me," Mitchell later told a colleague. "That's standard procedure when someone witnesses something they're not supposed to see. The question is who they are in this case." While on leave, Mitchell contacted a journalist he knew from his military days who worked for a regional newspaper. Together, they began investigating who might have placed the surveillance equipment and why. Their inquiry led them to a little-known government program called the Desert Anomaly Monitoring Initiative, a joint operation between multiple agencies with no public oversight. What they discovered was that Dead Horse Point State Park sat at the intersection of several geological fault lines and atmospheric phenomena that made it uniquely suited for certain types of observation and experimentation. The park's elevation and isolation created conditions similar to those found at nearby classified facilities, but without the restricted access. Before they could publish their findings, Mitchell's home was raided by federal agents, and all his research materials were confiscated. The journalist's computer was also seized, and their editor was visited by government officials who warned against publishing national security-sensitive material. Mitchell was reinstated to his position, but transferred to a different park in northern Utah, far from the desert southwest. He resigned from the Park Service 6 months later, citing personal reasons. In 2012, Mitchell published a book about his experiences under a pseudonym, though he changed names and locations to avoid legal complications. The book, Watcher in the Desert, received little attention, but did catch the eye of several investigators who noted similarities between Mitchell's account and other unexplained incidents in the region. As of 2023, Mitchell lives in a small town in Montana, where he occasionally speaks to UFO research groups about his experiences. He maintains that what he witnessed at Dead Horse Point was not extraterrestrial in nature, but rather part of a classified government program studying phenomena that science cannot yet explain. "The desert holds secrets that certain agencies don't want the public to know about," Mitchell said in a 2018 interview. Not because of aliens or conspiracies, but because these phenomena represent potential technologies and understandings that would change everything. We think we know about physics and reality. Dead Horse Point State Park continues to operate as normal, with no official acknowledgement of the surveillance equipment Mitchell documented. However, visitors familiar with Mitchell's account occasionally report unusual equipment sightings in remote areas of the park. Though park officials dismissed these as standard wildlife monitoring devices, it was early April of 2010 when seasonal ranger Sarah Mitchell began her first assignment at Goblin Valley State Park. Mitchell, a graduate student in geology, had specifically requested the placement due to her interest in the park's unique hoodoo formations. What she would document during her 3-month tenure would become one of the most puzzling cases in Utah State Park's history. Mitchell's first unusual observation occurred on April 12th, during a routine survey of the Carmel Canyon area. While documenting erosion patterns on the hoodoos, she noticed a series of perfectly cylindrical holes drilled into several formations. These holes were approximately 2 inches in diameter, 6 inches deep, and arranged in precise geometric patterns that didn't correspond to any natural erosion processes. "I initially thought they might be core samples taken by previous researchers," Mitchell wrote in her field notes. "But when I checked with park management, they had no record of authorized drilling in this area. The precision of the holes was also unusual. They appeared to be made with equipment far more advanced than standard geological tools. Over the following weeks, Mitchell discovered more of these mysterious holes throughout the park, always in remote areas rarely visited by tourists. She began photographing and documenting each location, eventually mapping nearly 50 sites with similar drill patterns. What Mitchell found most curious was that the holes appeared to be recently made, with fresh rock surfaces and no weathering. When she shared her findings with her supervisor, Ranger David Chen, he suggested they might be the work of vandals or unauthorized researchers, though he agreed to report the findings to park management. By early May, Mitchell's investigation had taken a more personal turn. While working late in the park's research cabin on May 7th, she experienced what she later described as a profound sense of being watched, despite being alone. When she stepped outside to investigate, she noticed a series of lights moving across the desert floor in patterns that didn't correspond to any known vehicle or aircraft. The lights moved in impossible ways. Mitchell wrote in a personal journal entry dated May 8th. They would hover, then accelerate instantly, making right-angled turns that defied inertia. I tried to photograph them, but they didn't appear in the images, though I could see them clearly with my naked eye. The following night, Mitchell set up audio recording equipment near one of the drilled hoodoo formations. What she captured would later be analyzed by acoustics experts who could not identify the source or nature of the sounds. The recording contains a series of low-frequency pulses that appear to be communicating with something underground, said Dr. Eleanor Vance, who analyzed the recording in 2011. There's a mathematical precision to the pulses that suggests artificial origin, but the frequencies are below what's typically used in human communication systems. On May 15th, Mitchell returned to the research cabin after a day of fieldwork to find that someone had been inside. Nothing was stolen, but several of her research notes and photographs were missing. Most disturbingly, her camera had been wiped clean of all images from the past week, despite being password protected. Mitchell reported the break-in to Ranger Chen, who noted in his report that there were no signs of forced entry to the cabin. The park's security system showed no alarms triggered during the time Mitchell was away, and no other staff members had accessed the cabin. It was as if whoever entered had a way to bypass both physical and electronic security. Chen later stated, "Sarah was understandably shaken by this. I suggested she take some time off, but she refused, saying she was close to understanding what was happening." The final entry in Mitchell's field journal is dated May 20th. It reads, "They're not just studying the formations, they're using them. The holes aren't samples, they're connection points. I think I've figured out the pattern, but I'm being watched. If anything happens to me, check the coordinates I marked in the margin of the May 12th entry." Sarah Mitchell was last seen by another park employee at approximately 6:30 p.m. on May 20th, leaving the research cabin with her camera and field equipment. When she failed to return to her dormitory by 11 p.m., a search was initiated. What searchers found the next morning was puzzling. Mitchell's vehicle was parked near the entrance to the Carmel Canyon Trail, locked and containing her personal belongings. Inside the vehicle was a note written on park stationery. "Following the sound. Don't follow me. This is something I need to do alone." Search teams combed the area for days, eventually finding Mitchell's field journal and camera near a group of hoodoos, approximately 2 miles from her vehicle. The journal was open to the May 12th entry, where a series of coordinates were written in the margin. The camera contained only one image, a close-up of one of the drilled holes, showing what appeared to be a blue light emanating from within. Despite extensive search efforts that included helicopters, tracking dogs, and dozens of volunteers, no trace of Sarah Mitchell was ever found. The official investigation concluded that she had likely become disoriented and lost in the desert. Though this explanation failed to account for her experience as a geologist or the strange circumstances surrounding her disappearance. In 2012, 2 years after Mitchell's disappearance, a group of geology students conducting research in the area made a disturbing discovery. At one of the coordinates Mitchell had marked in her journal, they found a hoodoo formation that appeared to have been recently modified. The cylindrical holes Mitchell had documented were now connected by carved channels, forming what looked like a circuit board etched into the rock. When we examined the formation closely, we found that the rock had been somehow altered at a molecular level, said Dr. Marcus Thorne, who led the student expedition. The temperature of the connected holes was significantly higher than the surrounding rock, as if some energy was flowing through the system. We've never seen anything like it in nature. The student's discovery was documented and reported to park authorities, but the formation has since been closed to public access. Official explanations vary, with some reports attributing the phenomenon to unusual mineral deposits and others making no attempt to explain it at all. Sarah Mitchell has never been found, and her case remains officially open but inactive. Her family maintains a website with information about her disappearance, hoping that someone will eventually come forward with answers. What happened to Sarah wasn't a simple case of a hiker getting lost, said Dr. Thorne in a 2018 interview. She was investigating something real and significant. Those formations in Goblin Valley aren't just geological curiosities. They're part of something we don't yet understand. Sarah got too close to that understanding, and it cost her everything. It was mid-June of 2014, when Ranger Benjamin Torres began experiencing unusual interference with the communication systems at Kodachrome Basin State Park. Torres, a former communications specialist with the Army, had been assigned to the relatively remote park as part of a rotation program. His technical background made him particularly qualified to address the mysterious disruptions that had been reported by staff and visitors alike. The first major incident occurred on June 12th, when all radio communications between the ranger station and field personnel were interrupted by a series of pulsating tones. These tones, which Torres later described as mathematically structured but unlike any known communication protocol, affected all frequencies used by the Park Service, including emergency channels. "I've experienced electronic warfare during my military service," Torres wrote in his initial report. This was different. The tones weren't jamming our communications so much as overriding them with something else. It was as if another system had temporarily taken control of our network. Torres documented the interference for 3 consecutive days, noting that it occurred at precisely 9:17 p.m. each evening and lasted for exactly 13 minutes. During these periods, all electronic equipment in the park experienced disruptions, including GPS units, cell phones, and even battery-powered devices that weren't connected to any network. On June 15th, Torres set up a spectrum analyzer to capture the signal's properties. What he discovered was unlike anything he had encountered in his 15 years of communications experience. The signal operated on multiple frequencies simultaneously, using a modulation technique that didn't correspond to any known human technology. The signal was incredibly complex, Torres later testified before a state committee. It appeared to be transmitting information in layers, with each frequency carrying different data that somehow combined into a coherent whole. Our equipment could barely capture it, let alone decode it. The most disturbing aspect of the signal was what Torres discovered when he finally managed to partially decode some of its content. Embedded within the mathematical structure were references to geological features of the park that were not publicly known, including underground water sources and mineral deposits that had never been surveyed. It was as if whoever was transmitting had access to information that shouldn't be available to anyone. Torres stated in his report. The signal referenced geological formations with perfect accuracy, including details about their composition that would require deep subsurface imaging to determine. On June 18th, Torres decided to trace the signal to its source. Using directional antennas, he determined that it was coming from the area known as Shakespeare Arch, a remote section of the park rarely visited by tourists. What he found there would challenge his understanding of reality. At approximately 9:10 p.m., Torres positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the arch with recording equipment. As 9:17 p.m. approached, he noticed a series of lights beginning to form around the arch itself. These lights weren't reflected from any source, but appeared to be emanating from the rock formation itself. When the signal began, at precisely 9:17 p.m., the entire arch appeared to vibrate at a frequency that was both visible and audible, Torres wrote in his field notes. The rock itself seemed to be the source of the transmission, as if the formation had been somehow activated to serve as an antenna or communication device. Torres documented the phenomenon for the full 13-minute duration, capturing both audio and visual recordings. What he observed was a series of geometric patterns of light that appeared to move across the surface of the arch in impossible ways, passing through solid rock as if it weren't there. The lights formed patterns that were too complex to be random, Torres later told a colleague. They were communicating something, but I couldn't begin to understand what. The closest analogy I can think of is watching someone operate technology that's thousands of years beyond our own. When the phenomenon ended at 9:30 p.m., Torres noticed that the rock around the arch appeared subtly changed. The colors seemed different, and when he examined it the next day, he found that its crystalline structure had been somehow altered. Geological analysis confirmed that the sandstone composition had been modified at a molecular level, said Dr. Eleanor Reed, who examined samples collected by Torres. The changes were subtle but significant, suggesting exposure to some form of energy or radiation that we can't reproduce or explain. Torres reported his findings to park management, who forwarded them to state authorities. Within a week, a team of federal agents arrived at the park, accompanied by technical specialists who confiscated all of Torres's equipment and recordings. He was debriefed for several hours and instructed not to discuss what he had witnessed with anyone. I was told that what I observed was part of a classified geological survey, Torres later stated. When I pointed out that the signal contained information no one could possibly know, I was reminded of my security obligations and warned against further investigation. Despite these warnings, Torres continued his own research during off-duty hours. What he discovered was that similar signals had been documented at other parks with unique geological formations throughout the American Southwest, though these reports had been classified or explained away as natural phenomena. There's a network of these formations, all communicating with each other using the Earth itself as a medium, Torres wrote in a personal journal. They're not just transmitting random data. They're monitoring something, possibly us. The question is, who or what is operating this system? Torres's tenure at Kodachrome Basin ended in August 2014, as scheduled. He requested a permanent assignment there, but his request was denied. Instead, he was transferred to a different park in northern Utah, far from the desert southwest. In 2016, Torres resigned from the Park Service and accepted a position with a private research institute that studies unexplained phenomena. He has occasionally spoken about his experiences at conferences, though he carefully avoids revealing classified information. What I witnessed at Kodachrome Basin wasn't extraterrestrial in the conventional sense, Torres said in a 2019 presentation. It was terrestrial, but not human. There's something operating in these remote desert regions, something ancient and technologically advanced. These geological formations aren't just rocks. They're part of a system that predates human civilization. As of 2023, the phenomenon at Kodachrome Basin has not been officially acknowledged. Park staff report occasional communication disruptions, but these are attributed to natural atmospheric conditions. The area around Shakespeare Arch remains open to the public, though visitors occasionally report unusual electronic interference and strange light phenomena, particularly around 9 p.m. Torres continues to research similar occurrences at other locations, hoping to eventually understand the purpose and origin of the mysterious signal he first documented in 2014. The desert holds secrets that challenge our understanding of technology and consciousness, Torres wrote in a 2022 article. What I witnessed was just one small piece of a puzzle that spans the entire Southwest. These formations are communicating with each other, and until we understand what they're saying, we're essentially trespassing in someone else's territory without even realizing it. It was early November of 2015 when Ranger Maria Rodriguez began documenting unusual light phenomena during her night patrols at Gooseneck State Park. Rodriguez, who had worked at the park for 3 years, was familiar with the night sky and could identify most aircraft, satellites, and natural light sources. What she began witnessing that autumn was something else entirely. The first significant sighting occurred on November 5th, while Rodriguez was conducting a routine patrol of the overlook areas. At approximately 10:23 p.m., she noticed a series of lights moving in formation below the rim of the canyon, where no trails or roads existed. These weren't vehicles or aircraft, Rodriguez wrote in her incident report. The lights moved silently and in perfect synchronization, following the contours of the canyon wall in ways that defied gravity. They would descend vertically, then make right-angled turns without slowing down. Rodriguez observed the phenomenon for approximately 15 minutes, attempting to photograph it with her department-issued camera. The images, however, showed only darkness, despite the lights being clearly visible to her naked eye. I tried multiple settings and even used my phone camera as a backup, Rodriguez stated in her report. None of the equipment captured what I was seeing. It was as if the lights existed in a spectrum that our technology couldn't record. Over the following 2 weeks, Rodriguez witnessed similar phenomena on 5 separate occasions. She began keeping detailed logs of the sightings, noting weather conditions, times, and the specific movements of the lights. What she discovered was a pattern that suggested deliberate, intelligent behavior. The lights appeared to be conducting some form of survey or measurement, Rodriguez later told a colleague. They would stop at specific locations, sometimes hovering for extended periods before moving to the next spot. The sequence of locations formed a pattern that covered the entire canyon system. On November 19th, Rodriguez decided to set up specialized monitoring equipment at one of the locations where the lights had frequently appeared. Using a thermal camera borrowed from the local fire department, she hoped to capture images that might reveal the nature of the phenomenon. What she captured instead was even more puzzling. The thermal camera showed significant temperature fluctuations in the areas where the lights appeared, with temperatures dropping by as much as 30 degrees in a matter of seconds, then returning to normal just as quickly. The thermal readings were unlike anything I'd ever seen, said Dr. James Chen, who later analyzed Rodriguez's data. The temperature changes were too rapid and localized to be caused by any known natural phenomenon. It was as if something was absorbing and then releasing thermal energy in a controlled manner. The most dramatic incident occurred on November 26th, when Rodriguez observed a larger and more complex display of lights. On this occasion, approximately 20 lights appeared simultaneously, forming a three-dimensional grid that extended from the canyon floor to several hundred feet above the rim. They weren't just lights anymore. Rodriguez wrote in what would be her final report on the phenomenon. They were connected by beams of energy that formed a complex geometric structure. The entire canyon was illuminated by this network, which pulsated with a rhythm that seemed almost biological. As Rodriguez watched, the structure began to change shape, with the lights and connecting beams rearranging themselves into different configurations. What happened next would become the most controversial aspect of her account. I heard a voice in my head, not auditory, but more like thoughts that weren't my own, Rodriguez later testified. It wasn't language as we understand it, but rather a direct transmission of concepts and images. What I received was a warning about disturbing something that had been dormant for a very long time. When the phenomenon ended after approximately 20 minutes, Rodriguez found that her patrol vehicle, which had been parked nearby, would not start. All electronic systems were dead, despite showing no signs of damage. A tow truck had to be called the next morning to retrieve the vehicle. Mechanics who examined the vehicle could find no explanation for the failure. All the electronic systems were simply fried, said garage owner Tom Henderson. Not like an electrical surge, which would leave physical evidence. It was more like the information had been erased from the components themselves. Rodriguez submitted a comprehensive report of her observations to park management, including the thermal images and her own testimony. The response was not what she expected. Instead of launching an investigation, park officials placed her on administrative leave and ordered a psychological evaluation. I knew they would think I was crazy, Rodriguez later told a friend. What I saw defies explanation. But it was real. The physical evidence supports my account, even if the experience itself sounds unbelievable. While on leave, Rodriguez contacted a former professor from her college days who specialized in unexplained phenomena. Together, they began analyzing the data she had collected, comparing it with similar incidents documented at other locations throughout the Southwest. What Maria witnessed was part of a larger pattern of phenomena that occur in areas with specific geological characteristics, said Dr. Eleanor Vance, who assisted Rodriguez with her analysis. These locations all share certain mineral compositions and geological features that may somehow interact with unknown energy sources or technologies. Before they could complete their analysis, Rodriguez was informed that her position at the park had been eliminated due to budget cuts. Her research materials were confiscated as property of the park service, and she was warned against discussing her experiences with anyone. In 2017, Rodriguez accepted a position with a private research organization studying consciousness and reality. She has occasionally spoken about her experiences, though carefully avoids revealing classified information. What I witnessed at Goosenecks wasn't just lights in the sky, Rodriguez said in a 2020 interview. It was something that existed between dimensions, using the canyon as a focal point. The message I received about disturbing something dormant has stayed with me. I believe these geological formations serve as gateways or interfaces, and someone or something is concerned that we're getting too close to understanding how they work. As of 2023, Gooseneck State Park continues to operate as normal, with no official acknowledgement of the phenomena Rodriguez documented. However, visitors familiar with her account occasionally report unusual light sightings, particularly around the canyon rim after dark. Park management dismisses these reports as misidentified aircraft or natural phenomena, though a former park employee, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that staff continue to experience unexplained incidents. What Maria saw wasn't an isolated event, the former employee stated. It happens regularly, but we're instructed to explain it away or ignore it entirely. There's a concern that acknowledging these phenomena might affect tourism or attract unwanted attention to the area. Rodriguez, for her part, continues to research similar occurrences at other locations, hoping to eventually understand the nature of what she witnessed in the canyon that November. These aren't random events, Rodriguez wrote in a 2022 article. They're part of something systematic and purposeful. The question isn't whether these phenomena exist. It's what they signify and who or what is behind them. Until we're willing to ask those questions honestly, we'll remain in the dark about forces that operate just beyond the edge of our perception. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. The Utah desert, in particular, holds a silence that is not empty, but full. For the rangers who patrol its boundaries, this silence is a constant companion, and sometimes it speaks. These 7 accounts, drawn from official records and first-hand testimony, represent only a fraction of the incidents that have been documented in the shadow of Area 51. They are stories that challenge our understanding of geology, physics, and reality itself. What connects these experiences is not a single entity or phenomenon, but a persistent pattern of the impossible manifesting in the most ordinary of circumstances. A ranger vanishes from a closed truck. A geologist discovers symbols that change overnight. Surveillance equipment monitors something that isn't human. Each case ends not with a solution, but with a quiet acknowledgement that some questions have no answers. Only evidence that something beyond our comprehension is at work. The desert remembers what we are not meant to know, and it keeps its secrets well. The common thread is the aftermath. The sealed reports, the transferred personnel, the warnings against further inquiry. There is an institutional silence that follows these incidents, a quiet closing of ranks that suggests knowledge is being contained as carefully as the phenomena themselves. For every story that reaches the public, countless others are filed away in forgotten archives, their details classified as geological anomalies or psychological events. The rangers who witnessed them often carry the weight of these memories alone. Their careers altered, their understanding of the world permanently shifted. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences is how we build a clearer picture of the mysteries that surround us. Thank you for watching Sleepless Campfire. Until next time, stay safe out there.